Let's say you're looking for the perfect combination of power and dynamics out of your toms. You want full tone, good attack, and excellent dynamic range, both from the softest rolls to the most aggressive fills. Your favorite drummers' kits speak with this kind of authority, so you want that for yourself. But you're not totally sure how each of the parts of the drum contribute to this final sound. Do you need more muffling? Do you need a certain interval between the two heads or a specialized batter head to get there? If you're not sure about any of that, this is the video for you. We don't need to make any drastic changes to what's going on with our drums to get where we need to go. Today, we're going to deconstruct this tom's tone and show you exactly how each constituent part is working together to give us the final result. We dove into a project like this recently with the bass drum and had a great time doing it, so we've decided to put a spin on it and do a similar exploration for the toms. You've already heard a little bit of our final sound in the playing that's already occurred in the video, but let's give special notice to where we're at with this drum right now. If you're new here to Sounds Like a Drum, you may not know that this is exactly what we do here. We are into deep dives and clarification of things that are hidden behind the curtain and not necessarily obvious when it comes to great drum sounds. You may feel like good tone, good attack, and good dynamics is too much to ask of a tom at a single tuning. It's true, this can be a challenge, but if we understand how the ingredients work together, we can make intelligent adjustments that'll get us where we want to go. Some pitfalls that we can run into are leaning too hard into a certain kind of tuning because of one aspect of the sound we want to emphasize. If we take a drum and tune it super low, given its size and dimensions, we're going to get more attack, but we're going to lose out on some dynamic range. Similarly, if we start out with a ton of muffling because we want to fatten up the tone, and maybe we've seen people begin with that, we're totally writing off what we're going to lose when we add that much mass to the batter head. This is like applying a bandage before you've received the injury. We need to understand what we're treating before we start to treat it. Unlike some previous videos exploring this kind of topic, today, rather than beginning with the final sound in the following demonstrations, we're going to start with how we built it from the ground up. Let's begin with just the batter head, no reso, and no muffling. This kind of setup is sometimes referred to as a concert tom, and it promotes attack and limits tone. The concert tom setup can be beneficial in a few different contexts, particularly if we want this kind of attack and we want shorter sustain without a lot of tone dragging out of the drum. This also gives us a lot more projection off of the drum for the complete drum sound, not just the attack, but also the amount of tone that we're getting. Right now, the drum at this setup sounds like it's not pitched terribly high, but as you'll see later when we start to add other components to it, it's actually under a fair amount of tension. This contributes both to the attack and the projection without having the overall pitch be too high. We're going to add the reso head in a moment, but before we do that, we want to give you an idea of what might happen if we choose instead to add a little bit of muffling to this setup without adding anything else. Here's a quick back-to-back comparison of the initial concert tom setup with no muffling and then the addition of a little bit of tape. Now, if you can't hear the difference between those two examples, that's okay. What that means is that we don't need the muffling. If you're choosing muffling based on what you've seen other players do rather than actually exploring what a certain amount of it does to your sound, chances are you're not totally sure what the result's going to be. This is akin to putting a bandage on before you have an injury. We need to understand what we're treating and how to treat it before we can do it effectively. It's time now to add the resonant head. We're going to get a lot more tone, but not just that. Check this out. The first thing I'm noticing is that there's a lot more tone, there's a significant amount of sustain. I'm also hearing more presence of overtones. What is maybe less expected, especially if you yourself haven't done this experiment, is the whole pitch of the drum has gone up a lot. In previous videos over the years, we've explored what happens when you have a batter head and a resonant head that are tuned particularly to two different pitches, and how you get a third pitch out of the drum based on the confluence of those two. Let's give a listen to the individual pitches of each of these heads. The resonant head is pitched a little bit higher than the batter. The exact interval is not the most important piece of information because every drum is a little bit different, but for the purposes of today, it's approximately a minor third between the two. For the record, we didn't use any devices or tuners or any kind of special apparatus to make this happen. We just used our ears, and we highly recommend that as much ear training as you can do, just do it. Now that we have the resonant head installed, we are getting more tone and more sustain. We're also getting more harmonic content off of the batter head, some of which is a little bit dissonant. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if we have a really good and tight strike zone on the batter head, but as you'll see in a little while, if we start to move toward the edge, things can get a little out of hand. We don't want to completely quell all of this because it's going to affect our articulation. We need to retain some of the high frequency response. As you can see from the overhead shots, we've had muffling on the floor tom the entire time. To give ourselves some context for the experiment today, we got a sound out of the floor tom that made us happy, and now we're going for something that matches it in terms of similar tone, similar sustain, and that sound like they belong together. In accordance with that, I'm going to start with a small amount of muffling, same as what the floor tom has, just 2 pieces of tape. It's worth noting that where the tape is placed is as important as how much we put on here, and we'll talk about that a little later. Let's give a listen to the drum now with the tape applied. This is a great sound, and it goes with the floor tom that gave us the context for what we were looking to do. You can hear that the tom is a bit more focused, there's a little less harmonic content all over, and it has a very round sound, which is nice, but is still projecting because we haven't over muffled it. Similarly to when we were talking about this drum when we didn't have the resonant head on, if you don't hear a difference between the muffled sound and the unmuffled sound, it means that we don't need it. And just because there's muffling on the floor tom, doesn't mean that we need to put muffling on this one too. Everything we're doing here is following our ears. We have an idea about what we're looking for, we have an idea of how the ingredients are going to work together to do it, and a little bit of exploration gets us where we need to go. In order to really get a clear idea of exactly what this muffling is doing for us, let's listen to this drum played from edge to center and back again, both with and without the muffling. This difference is subtle, and if we wanted more oppression of those edge sounds, we could add more muffling. But in terms of playing in the center and getting a powerful sound but also having dynamics, this feels like a good amount. By keeping our muffling to a minimum, we retain a good amount of attack in this drum, which is one of the things that we're looking for, particularly to match it to the floor tom, but also in terms of being able to use the full dynamic range and have that range be audible to a microphone or an audience or even to ourselves. This is a viewer-supported channel, and while we love everything we read in the comments, compliments, kind words, they warm our hearts. However, the best way to help us keep the lights on around here is to follow the link below and join our Patreon. There's a sliding scale for contributions on there and lots of content at all of the different levels. The community that's grown up around this channel over the last 7 years has been incredible, and the journey that we've gotten to go on with you over all this time, talking about drum sounds and growing our abilities, has been one of the most incredible experiences that either of us has had. Now more than ever, anything that you can contribute to help us continue to making these videos and grow this community is going to be welcome, and hopefully we can continue to do this long into the future. Now, for those of you intrepid enough to make it this far into the video, the full comparison where we dismantle and then rebuild this sound back to back. Knowing the role of each component in a sound is really integral to being able to take control of those things and make intelligent decisions on what sound you want to make. It's not dissimilar from cooking. If you have a recipe that calls for lemon and cayenne pepper, Those are great, but if we don't know how much of each and also how they're going to interact in the flavor of what we're cooking, it could go off the rails really fast. In the end, getting a drum sound isn't so much a recipe that we're following, but it is more like tasting along the way and making sure that we're moving in the direction that's going to get us where we want to go. So take the leap. This is the challenge. Pick one of your drums, whether you're happy with how it sounds or not, and deconstruct it. Keep track of what you did, and then build it back up again and bring it back to where it was. Every time you do this is going to be a learning experience for your ears and get you closer to having total control of your sound.